In Birmingham, Alabama, a quiet suburban street would become the epicenter of a crime so devastating it would forever redefine the meaning of betrayal. One cold March evening, as families settled into their nightly routines, the Harper household erupted into a scene of unimaginable violence. But what truly shook this close-knit community wasn't just the crime. It was the discovery of who was behind it. The year was 2008, and the Harper family seemed like a beacon of stability. Janice Harper was a devoted mother who balanced her career with nurturing her 3 children. Her youngest, Malik, just 12, and Jalen, only 8, were lively and full of promise. At 16, Aisha Harper was a bright student, known for her outgoing nature and her infectious smile. But behind that cheerful facade, Aisha carried a secret that would ultimately tear her family apart. Aisha had fallen for Jerome Tucker, an 18-year-old with a troubled past. Their relationship, while intense, was also contentious. When Janice and her husband Mark forbade Aisha from seeing Jerome, they believed they were protecting their daughter from heartbreak and danger. Little did they know, that decision would seal their fate. On March 3rd, the Harper family home was consumed by fire. But this was no tragic accident. Firefighters made a horrifying discovery. The bodies of Janice, Malik, and Jalen, all brutally slain before the flames had been set. The only survivor was Aisha, who was found trembling in the woods nearby. She claimed masked intruders had broken into their home and killed her family. But as investigators began to piece together the truth, a more shocking reality began to unfold. What would drive a teenage girl to orchestrate the destruction of her own family? How did an intense teenage romance spiral into a meticulously planned act of violence? And why did Jerome, along with his friend Marcus Dillard, agree to carry out such a monstrous deed? These are the questions that baffled detectives and left a community reeling. Today we unravel the details of this harrowing case, from the events leading up to the crime to the shocking revelations that emerged during the investigation. Prepare yourself for a story of betrayal, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of unchecked passion. Stay with us as we uncover the dark truths behind the Harper family tragedy. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. This is a case that will leave you questioning just how well you know the people closest to you. Janice Harper was a woman who could light up any room she entered. Known for her radiant smile and a heart full of compassion, she was the kind of person who never hesitated to lend a helping hand. Whether it was organizing bake sales for the church or staying up late to help her children with their school projects, Janice was the embodiment of dedication. Her family was her world. Her youngest boys, Malik and Jalen, were the perfect picture of innocence and joy. Malik, at just 12 years old, was brimming with curiosity. He had dreams of becoming an astronaut and spent hours building model rockets in his room. Jalen, only 8, followed his big brother everywhere, mimicking his every move with a laugh that could warm even the coldest heart. The 2 boys were inseparable, their bond a constant source of joy in the Harper household. And then there was Aisha Harper. At 16, she was everything a parent could hope for on the surface. An honor roll student with a bright future ahead of her. Teachers spoke of her potential, friends admired her confidence, and her parents took pride in the young woman she was becoming. But like many teenagers, Aisha was navigating her struggles. Her relationship with her parents had grown strained, a tension fueled by the pressures of adolescence and the arrival of someone new in her life. That someone was Jerome Tucker. At 18, Jerome was charismatic, quick with a joke, and had a way of making Aisha feel like she was the center of the universe. To Aisha, Jerome represented freedom, excitement, and the kind of love she had only read about in books. But Jerome's charm masked a darker side. He had a troubled history, run-ins with the law, a volatile temper, and a knack for attracting trouble. And then there was Marcus Dillard, Jerome's longtime friend and partner in mischief. Marcus was the kind of person who made people uneasy just by walking into a room. His rough exterior and cold demeanor were matched by his reputation. An unpredictable young man who seemed to thrive on pushing boundaries. Together, Jerome and Marcus were a dangerous combination. A storm waiting to strike. The Harper family lived in a modest, one-story brick home nestled in a quiet suburb of Birmingham, Alabama. The neighborhood was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and neighbors greeted each other with a smile and a wave. Towering oak trees lined the streets, casting dappled sunlight over the well-kept lawns. The Harpers' house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, its red brick facade and neatly trimmed bushes blending seamlessly into the idyllic surroundings. It wasn't extravagant, but it was home, a place filled with laughter, love, and the comforting routines of family life. Janice could often be seen tending to the small garden in the front yard, her boys playing catch in the driveway, while Aisha lounged on the porch, headphones in, lost in her world. But on the night of March 3rd, that sense of peace was shattered. The house that once stood as a symbol of family unity and warmth would become the epicenter of a nightmare no one could have imagined. The laughter that once echoed through the walls was replaced by silence, and the warm glow of the Harper household was extinguished forever. This was a neighborhood where tragedy seemed like a distant concept, but on that night, the tranquility of this quiet Birmingham suburb was replaced by flashing lights, rising smoke, and a horror that no one would ever forget. In the stillness of the early morning on March 3, 2008, a sudden eruption shattered the peace. The sound of crackling flames filled the air, accompanied by the wail of sirens slicing through the quiet Birmingham neighborhood. Flames clawed at the night sky as smoke billowed high above the Harper family home, turning the serene suburban street into a scene of chaos. Neighbors stumbled out of their homes, their faces etched with shock and confusion as they stood in the cold, watching the inferno consume the Harper residence. Parents shielded their children's eyes while others whispered prayers under their breath. No one could comprehend the terror unfolding before them. Inside the Harper home, the fire raged with merciless intensity. So far this winter, as Harper family's record of setting fires at home has gone, they had remained on staff speaking with reporters, rambling as they struggled to keep the hospital running. Firefighters worked desperately to control the flames, dousing the structure with water as heat and smoke fought back with every passing moment. It was clear that the house, and the lives inside, was at the center of an unspeakable tragedy. When firefighters finally breached the smoldering remains of the Harper residence, the scene they uncovered was far more horrific than anyone could have anticipated. In the charred remains of the living room, they found Janice Harper's lifeless body. Malik and Jalen, just children, were discovered in their bedrooms, the innocence of their young lives extinguished in a way too brutal to imagine. But something didn't sit right. While the fire had ravaged the home, the evidence told a far more chilling story. The bodies bore no signs of burns or smoke inhalation, indicating they hadn't died in the fire. Someone had killed them beforehand. As first responders processed the grim scene, a call came in from a nearby wooded area. A teenage girl, disheveled and trembling, had been found by a local resident. It was Aisha Harper, the eldest child of the family. Clinging to a thin blanket, she recounted a harrowing tale. Masked intruders had broken into their home, she said, murdering her family before setting the fire. She claimed she had narrowly escaped, running into the woods to hide. At first glance, her story seemed plausible. The grief-stricken teenager appeared shaken, her voice breaking as she described the horror she had witnessed. But as investigators began piecing together the events of that night, small cracks began to form in Aisha's account. Forensic teams determined that the fire had been deliberately set. Accelerants were discovered in multiple locations throughout the house, pointing to a calculated effort to destroy evidence. Even more damning was the revelation that Janice, Malik, and Jalen had all suffered fatal stab wounds. The brutality of the crime left investigators certain that this wasn't a random act of violence. As detectives combed through the debris, they found no evidence to support Aisha's story of masked intruders. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints leading away from the home, and no DNA from any alleged assailants. Suspicion began to grow. The first significant inconsistencies began to emerge in the interviews with Aisha. Her initial claim of hearing voices in the house shifted to vague recollections of a struggle. Detectives noticed her responses were hesitant and her timeline muddled. When asked how she had managed to escape the inferno without injury, her answers faltered. Then came the most damning piece of evidence. Hidden among Aisha's belongings was a set of handwritten notes. They weren't school assignments or diary entries, but detailed plans for what investigators could only describe as a murder plot. The notes outlined who would do what, when it would happen, and how it would all be carried out. The discovery turned the investigation on its head. Aisha Harper wasn't a victim of a random home invasion. She was the mastermind behind the destruction of her own family. Who could have helped her carry out such an unthinkable act? And why would a 16-year-old girl choose to destroy the very people who had given her life? These questions would lead investigators into a web of secrets, manipulation, and deadly ambition, unraveling a story that would shake Birmingham and the nation to its core. The morning after the fire, Birmingham awoke to heartbreak and disbelief. News of the Harper family tragedy spread quickly, leaving the tight-knit community in shock. Candlelight vigils were held on the street where the family had lived, with neighbors clutching photos of Janice, Malik, and Jalen, their faces etched with sorrow. People asked how such a nightmare could have unfolded in their... The Harpers were a beloved family, a pillar of kindness and warmth, but as investigators began digging into the events of that night, an undercurrent of confusion and unease began to emerge. At the center of it all was Aisha Harper, the sole survivor of the attack. Her initial account of masked intruders painted her as a victim, a young girl who had narrowly escaped a horrifying fate, but detectives couldn't ignore the oddities in her behavior. During interviews, Aisha's demeanor seemed strangely composed. Her responses were curt, her tears fleeting. While others in the community sobbed openly for the Harpers, Aisha appeared detached, almost mechanical, when recounting the horrific events. Her lack of emotional connection raised more than a few eyebrows. As detectives pressed for details, Aisha's story became increasingly inconsistent. She described hearing men shouting and seeing shadows, but couldn't explain why there were no signs of forced entry into the home. She claimed she fled the house before the fire engulfed it, yet there was no evidence of soot or burns on her clothing. With every word she spoke, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something about Aisha's story didn't add up. The turning point came when the autopsy results were released. The medical examiner confirmed that Janice, Malik, and Jalen hadn't succumbed to the fire. They had been shot at close range. The brutality of the attack was staggering, and it left investigators certain that this crime had been planned with precision. From there, the focus shifted to uncovering who was behind the murders, and how Aisha had managed to survive unscathed. The first breakthrough came from Aisha's own phone records. Detectives found a series of late-night calls between Aisha and a number saved as JT on her phone. The frequency and timing of the calls raised eyebrows, especially since they took place just hours before the fire was reported. When authorities traced the number, it led them to Jerome Tucker, Aisha's boyfriend. Jerome, a young man with a troubled past, had been a point of contention between Aisha and her parents. Jerome's association with Marcus Dillard, a man with a criminal record for burglary and assault, added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Interviews with neighbors soon provided another crucial lead. One witness reported seeing a black sedan parked near the Harper home in the hours before the fire broke out. The witness described the car as unfamiliar, with two young men sitting inside, their faces obscured by hoodies. The description matched the car Jerome drove, a vehicle often seen speeding through the neighborhood late at night. As the evidence mounted, detectives began piecing together a story far different from the one Aisha had initially shared. Under pressure, Jerome Tucker was brought in for questioning. At first he denied any involvement, insisting he had been home all night, but when detectives confronted him with phone records and the witness report of his car near the crime scene, cracks began to form in his alibi. It wasn't long before Jerome's story unraveled completely. Jerome's confession painted a picture of manipulation, betrayal, and calculated violence, but it also revealed an even more shocking truth, one that would cast Aisha in a damning new light. As investigators continued to unravel the web of deception, they realized that the tragic fire on March 3rd wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The trial of Aisha Harper, Jerome Tucker, and Marcus Dillard captivated the nation, drawing intense media attention and public outrage. Courtrooms packed with spectators, families grieving, and reporters seeking every detail. They all bore witness to the unraveling of a tragedy that seemed impossible to comprehend. Prosecutors painted a harrowing picture of betrayal and violence, Aisha was portrayed as the mastermind, a teenager consumed by rebellion and infatuation who orchestrated the unthinkable. Jerome and Marcus, they argued, were willing participants, enticed by Aisha's manipulations and their own reckless disregard for human life. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Text messages, phone records, and Marcus's detailed confession laid bare the cold, calculated nature of the crime. In the courtroom, Aisha's stoic expression never wavered, even as her classmates and neighbors testified to the drastic transformation they had seen in her demeanor leading up to the murders. When the verdicts were read, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Aisha Harper was found guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder and arson. The judge, unmoved by her age or claims of emotional manipulation, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jerome Tucker, whose direct involvement in the murders was undeniable, was handed the ultimate punishment: death. Marcus Dillard, though cooperative in the investigation, received a life sentence for his role in the crime. The sentences were met with mixed reactions. For some, they were a necessary measure of justice for an unspeakable act. For others, they sparked debates about the influence of youth, love, and manipulation in shaping human behavior. But for the Harper family's surviving relatives, no sentence could ever repair the devastation left in the wake of Aisha's actions. As the legal proceedings concluded, the scars left on the Birmingham community were impossible to ignore. The once quiet suburb, known for its friendly neighbors and peaceful streets, now bore the weight of an unimaginable tragedy. The Harper family home, once a symbol of warmth and togetherness, stood as a charred reminder of the lives lost within its walls. The community struggled to reconcile the Aisha they thought they knew, a bright, promising young girl, with the Aisha who had masterminded such a horrific act. Parents whispered fears to one another about whether they could ever truly know their own children. Friends questioned how someone so close to them could harbor such deep resentment and anger. In the months that followed, candlelight vigils were held in honor of Janice, Malik, and Jalen Harper. Their smiling faces, frozen in time through photos displayed at the ceremonies, served as a stark contrast to the haunting memories of that fateful night. The tragedy forced many to confront difficult questions. How could this have been prevented? What signs had been missed? The case of Aisha Harper remains a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the dangers of unchecked emotions. It's a story that has been retold countless times in classrooms, documentaries, and conversations, each time eliciting the same disbelief and heartache. In the end, this case wasn't just about a family torn apart by violence. It was a lesson in the unpredictable nature of human behavior, the consequences of forbidden love, and the devastating ripple effects that a single act of betrayal can cause. To this day, the Harper family's story stands as a haunting echo, a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, lives can be shattered in extraordinary ways. As the courtroom doors closed on the final chapter of this tragedy, one question lingered in the minds of many. Was justice truly served, or were there wounds that would never fully heal? The tragedy of the Harper family will forever be etched into the fabric of Birmingham's history. It's a story that forces us to confront unsettling truths about the human capacity for betrayal and the power of unchecked emotions. How could a young girl, barely on the cusp of adulthood, orchestrate such an unthinkable act against the very people who loved her most? Was it the intoxicating pull of forbidden love, the rebellion of a teenager yearning for control, or something even deeper? A complex web of emotions we may never fully untangle. This case is more than just a story of crime. It's a mirror reflecting the fragile connections within families and the devastating consequences when those connections are severed. It challenges us to look closer, to ask questions we may not want to ask, and to see the warning signs that are so often overlooked until it's too late. What do you think drove Aisha Harper to take such a horrifying path? Was it the influence of her relationship with Jerome Tucker? Or was there something within her that we failed to understand? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Or was it destined to happen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective. If you found this story compelling, there's more to come. Like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into another shocking story of crime, betrayal, and the search for justice. Your support helps us continue to explore these complex cases and shed light on the untold truths behind them. Thank you for joining us as we uncover the devastating tale of the Harper family. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, truth is often stranger than fiction. We'll see you in the next mystery.